We saw a series of disturbing headlines in the second quarter, including the Anthropic CEO claiming that AI could wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs. We also heard that for some recent grads, the AI job apocalypse may already be here. That was accompanied by a number of AI first letters written by Box and Shopify, Fiverr, also followed on by Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, all suggesting they were going to freeze their hiring and probably shrink over time. And then finally, Jensen Huang from NVIDIA said kids shouldn't learn to code, that AI can do the coding for them. You're listening to the Getting Smart podcast. I'm Tom Vander Ark, and we're talking about workforce and pathways today with Kerry McKittrick. She's the co-director of a project on workforce at Harvard. It's a very cool interdisciplinary shop. It's a project between the Harvard Kennedy School, the Business School, and the GSE. Kerry, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Great to be here.
I love that you're kind of suspended there between the Kennedy School, the Policy School, the Business School, and the GSE. It seems elegant, but probably complicated.
That's a good way to put it. It doesn't come without its challenges, but I think it gives us a really unique space to kind of translate the research for different kinds of actors. We know oftentimes industry doesn't necessarily speak the same language as education, right? So we're able to kind of bring folks together, make sure, they're talking to each other in ways that each understand, as well as bring students together. So one of the cool things about our work is we have graduate students from across the schools.
That's great.
In a study group. So the teacher talks to the HR leader who talks to the future mayor, and we're trying to build a workforce, as it were.
I love that. There's a couple other similar projects, but they're focused on economics. And I love that the GSE is involved in this. So it's a cool to be able to draw from world experts in those different fields. Kerry, your motto on the website says, creating better pathways to economic mobility. We care a lot about pathways here at Getting Smart, but can you unpack that? Is that how you think about your mission?
It is. I think we think about it in a few ways. So I'll break that down, kind of where we focus our research. Taking a step back, I think we all agree that some of the pathways to opportunity are broken. Oftentimes, students only have the opportunity of college or nothing, right? They don't have multiple ways to earn a good wage and find a fulfilling career. So we look at how to make both kind of the traditional college, community college pathways better, how to connect students to good jobs, as well as how to navigate this broader workforce training ecosystem, looking at those pathways. And then the third piece I'd say is what are the structures, the systems, the supports that people need to navigate all of these different ways, with the goal of, again, making sure our system is delivering on economic mobility.
We super appreciate your mission, and man, it couldn't come at a better time. It feels I feel really paradoxical about this time, particularly for young adults. On one hand, there's never been more opportunity for them, even work that matters, to do, to contribute to their community using smart tools. That may include launching a business while they're in school or just out of school, which has never been easier and more affordable to step into contribution. And then the flip side of that are the headlines that I read in the outset, the AI job apocalypse. But it's harder. It seems harder for many college grads to find employment. How do you think about this moment in time, and particularly that the opportunities and challenges for young people, young adults?
Yeah, I think, we need to take a step back a little bit looking at the labor market. I think, we've seen trends in tech happening for a while. I think there are a lot of labor market forces at play here. AI certainly is having an impact, but we don't know, that AI is the cause of all the fears around entry-level jobs, right? And so I think we need to be careful about some of those assumptions. We can certainly say that it is changing what work looks like. I'm using generative AI for quick literature reviews, which previously may have been like a graduate student research assistant, we're shifting all of these things. So work is changing, but we don't quite know how fast companies are actually adapting. And especially at the small and medium-sized business level, generative AI is impacting work, it's impacting business, but in many companies, there isn't a substantial change yet. And so we need to be a little bit careful about what we're saying. You have the massive Amazons making these changes, but most
Right.
people are employed not by Amazon, right? So I think it's a complex issue we need to think about. And it's really important to understand what actually is happening now through surveys, through, different types of research and case studies before we make these big leaps.
I appreciate that. And I mean, to make this really specific, if our unemployment rate's hovering around 4.5%, recent college grads may be facing unemployment rate of more like 6 or 7. So it's incrementally higher, but
Yeah.
it's not the job apocalypse that some claim this year might be.
And it depends on the industry too, Tom, right? Like there are certain industries where you can absolutely get hired, where, they are still hiring in healthcare and manufacturing. So this is very industry and sector specific.
And geographically specific, right? It's
Mhm.
a combination of those. What seems unique about this point, and we've been through a couple cycles of automation, and we're clearly headed for another cycle of physical automation with particularly in humanoid robotics. But what's different about this phase that we're heading into is the cognitive automation that you
Mhm.
described, the changing nature of work, that many jobs are seeing at least certain tasks within that job being automated. Do you have a sense of how fast that's going to roll through the economy?
You know, it's a great question. I think so. Some of our research, David Deming has done some research at Harvard, finding that about 40% of adults are using AI overall, and about 28% using it for work. And so we know this is having an impact. How fast it's going to run through the job market is a different question. I think the challenge is it is going to be most likely targeting these white collar jobs like coders, like legal assistants, like financial analysts that we've been telling people for a long time are good jobs and has been good jobs. And so I do think, as things evolve, I think we need to be really agile because I think the predictions are tough at this point.
There was a Harvard and HBR report that came out a month ago that had kind of a surprising update on the top 10 uses of AI. And I think at the top of the list for the first time was companionship and therapy, that more and more people, at least in their private life, are looking to AI for a
Mhm.
mixture of therapeutic uses and for just general companionship. So that's an interesting new trend.
Indeed. That makes me nervous, I have to say. I mean, there's a whole public health kind of issue there, but on an economic mobility kind of frame, we know a lot of people are advancing through social connections. And social capital is a huge way that people get kind of career information, that they get access to other jobs. And so if people are sort of retreating away from these human relationships, I think there could be a real impact as well on how people navigate the workforce.
Let's dive into the education response to what's happening in the world. And first, I want to go back to your mission of creating better pathways to economic mobility. What is a pathway, and how does a collection of
Yeah.
pathways add up to sort of meeting workforce demands?
I think we use the term pathway a lot in our field. And so I think, yes, to start, secondary, post secondary workforce, there are pathways within companies, right? So opportunities for people to build skills, connections, move forward towards career goals. I think depending on the context, pathways may seem straightforward, but often when we're talking to workers, people are not moving in a straight line. And so while our system needs to be helping guide people in certain directions, I think pathways as kind of an institutional and a workforce concept needs to be kind of understanding that people are moving in zigzags and moving in circles and not quite moving forward. And so to sort of take a step back to where you started, I would say pathways are regional at their core. I think oftentimes there's an idea, okay, computer science, for example, is in demand nationally. It must be in my region. Not necessarily. So I think it starts when planning these with what's in demand regionally and what employers can be engaged. So when we think of pathways, it's really about aligning and smoothing the transitions between education and work. And doing it in a way that is people centered. That's not necessarily like how we hope they would move through the labor market or how we think they do, kind of that latter model, but actually accommodating how they actually do it in terms of trying out different things and, integrating work into their life in different ways.
Your view on pathways, does that increasingly include work-based learning experiences?
Absolutely. I would say work-based learning is core to any pathway that's going to be successful. We did a literature review of kind of all these programs and policies within the college ecosystem that are designed to connect students to good jobs. We called it the College to Jobs Initiative. We looked at kind of 13 buckets of interventions from career coaching to cohort models to internships and experiential learning. And far and away, the strongest evidence that causally links these programs to positive economic outcomes, including employment and earnings, is work based learning. Now, I think there are questions about work based learning, including like, what's the dosage folks need? What constitutes a high quality experience? And we have some ideas about that. But I would certainly say workplace experience, which traditionally hasn't been part of the classroom experience, is 100% critical to pathways, whether they're in high school or they're in college or even in a workplace, in a company, having opportunities to explore or try experiences in other departments is another way. So work-based learning can be kind of applied in all settings, I think.
Our friend and investor Ryan Craig has been a big advocate for apprenticeships
Yes.
for the last 5 years, and he more broadly he would argue that every young person should, at an earlier age, be able to step into an earn and learn ladder. Do you see apprenticeships and sort of alternative pathways that include earning and learning opportunities as part of the solution?
Oh, absolutely. I think they're, again, one pathway. I don't think, I wouldn't necessarily say everyone should go into an apprenticeship or everyone should go to college, right? There are different opportunities. I think we know registered apprenticeship tends to be, we call it, right, the gold standard because it is paid. It offers progressive learning, mentorship, all of these crucial pieces. So I think apprenticeship absolutely is a key piece. And we've seen some folks integrating apprenticeship into high schools. In some work we've done in a survey of governors' policy advisors, we found that a quarter of them talked about investing in or integrating youth apprenticeships into their programming. So this is definitely a trend, and I think it's a positive one, but it's also, a resource intensive and kind of complex strategic type of intervention. And so when we map the field of work-based learning, we try to provide all the different layers and all the different types, whether it's internships, co-ops, apprenticeships, that different institutions and different individuals can go through and still get positive results.
Governors seem to have latched on to workforce as a key issue. Some of them would include a focus on pathways, high value pathways
Certainly.
as part of that. I think you've been responsive to their interest with some recent publications. Tell us about governors reshaping workforce.
This is a really kind of exciting project that we just finished the first phase of. So we have been thrilled to partner with the National Governors Association. And we conducted a research project in which we interviewed governors' workforce policy advisors from 34 states, asking them a variety of questions and administered more technical surveys on Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act kind of policies and administrative pieces. And we wanted to understand kind of what the trends are in workforce, what the challenges are that they're facing, and really how governors play such a pivotal role in their state's workforce system, sitting at the intersection, above all the agencies of education, workforce, economic development, healthcare, right? Governors have a real power to bring all of these divisions and sectors together in a way that is sort of reflecting a new approach to workforce as a whole of life, whole of government trend.
Let's talk about support and guidance. You recently published a great report called Navigating Opportunity. I think we agree with you that this is a super important space and that there's some exciting developments coming in the guidance space.
Absolutely. Certainly agree and would love to hear about your work. So this is another multi-year research initiative. We did a survey, a nationally representative survey of low-wage workers across the United States, across ages, across industries, and asked a variety of questions about how they navigate their careers. And so we scoped that definition in terms of acquiring career information, making personal plans, and integrating education and work actions to progress through your life. We found a lot of really interesting findings, and we're currently building on them with focus groups to dive deeper. I'd say one of the key pieces, and this may confirm what folks have thought in the field for a long time, is that when people are getting career information, whether it's about job opportunities or education opportunities, it's coming from family and friends. So, family and friends were the top two sources of information. And interestingly, when we broke that down by what's your primary source of information, and we looked at folks' education levels, the less education you would have, so the more likely you are to rely on family and friends. So, I think we need to really kind of dive into this role of social capital, both in a way that can be kind of a propelling force to kind of positive economic opportunity, but also in some cases, it can be a limiting force if your social capital doesn't have knowledge or access to these high paying opportunities. And there's a lot of research. Raj Chetty has done some research on this, but I think there's a lot we need to dig into in career navigation. I guess the last thing I'll say, and I think this is particularly relevant to some of the work you've done, when we ask folks who they trust the most and who is most helpful, they say teachers and counselors. But only about, I think it was 10%, 8% have received information from those folks. So there's clearly a bigger role here for both teachers and counselors to play across education.
And that's certainly true both in college and in high school, right?
Absolutely. Our research was specifically 18 and up, so folks were in college, but I think there's been other research from, JSF and ASA and other folks who found similar things at the high school level. Absolutely.
At the high school level, I think something that we observed 30 years ago is that most successful schools had a really strong advisory program. And I think that's true today, maybe even more important than ever. And that advisory program was typically a handcrafted relationship with an advisor. Student small group of students would meet with an advisor several times a week. Unfortunately, we're seeing some schools eliminate that.
Mm.
It seems really disturbing at a time when students need more guidance, not less guidance. But what we're optimistic about is the addition of algorithms to smart advisors so that students are really getting thoughtful advice about pathways that combines market information with information about themselves, their interests, their
Mm.
aptitudes. And so I think we're optimistic about this combination of algorithm plus advisor
And
in the advising space. Do you buy that?
I'm a little more skeptical, Tom. I'm going to be honest, and maybe that's partly by nature of these kinds of things. But I think that, well, first of all, having the advisor there is crucial. As you're saying, there needs to be the human element of interpretation. I think a lot of these tools are really early, and I don't think, we have necessarily the safeguards in place. I'm going to give you kind of a weird example, but I read an article about how the answer from ChatGPT changes based on whether or not you use punctuation. I don't know if
Right.
you saw that.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, what if I'm a high schooler asking ChatGPT if I should go to college and I'm using punctuation or maybe I'm using text speak or whatever. So I put it in just an experiment to see, right? This is totally anecdotal. I got different advice based on whether I use punctuation or not. And the reason I say this is because all of these tools there are a lot of different factors that go into them. And I don't think we've thought through enough the evaluation criteria of these tools. And I don't think necessarily education systems and institutions have had the opportunity to both examine and maybe contribute to the evaluation criteria of these tools. It's not just about the prompt, it's about, all right, how well does what comes out match the equitable kind of outcomes we would hope for?
What about the interest and aptitude survey markets? We're seeing steady growth and use starting in middle grades. Are you optimistic about that? Are you concerned about it?
You know, I'd love to see what it's based on. I think a lot of our measurements, particularly around kind of what we might call durable skills and some of these other skills, are not, fully vetted. David Deming's done some great research at Harvard on leadership skills and has developed a pretty rigorous methodology there. I think before we're using these aptitude assessments, and I think they can be helpful in certain cases, helping students understand their interests, ideally helping them, maybe see opportunities that they wouldn't envision for themselves. But I do think we need to be careful about, what the underlying measurements are and how validated there are. There's certainly, some validated measures out there that would be comfortable using, but again, I think it's a time to be careful and a time to be really critical about evaluation.
Sometimes these aptitude and interest surveys that combine market surveys would advertise the potential of the pathway of one, sort of
Mm.
a handcrafted pathway that links market information, personal information, and informs sort of next best choices in an individualized course of study. Do you buy that vision, or are we a long ways away from that?
I absolutely buy personalization. I think we need personalization. Whether one pathway is the answer, I think is up for debate, especially as we're seeing the labor market change and pathways change all the
Right.
as jobs change, and this kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation, the pathways themselves will change. And so if we're recommending one pathway to a student, I think, we could be in kind of shaky territory.
Yeah.
I also think we need to be making sure that these pathways are agile and revised and constantly kind of in communication with industry to make sure they're relevant still.
Yeah. Boy, it's just agility and adaptability are just more important than ever.
Absolutely.
We're seeing that today in the computer science field, and we have this live question of, if we teach coding, what kind of coding do we teach, or
Mhm.
or is it really computational thinking? These are really live, important questions. So it suggests that this advice that we're dispensing and that algorithms are dispensing really does need to be dynamic and probably tempered.
I'm with you there. And I think that, is why the involvement of industry and leaders is so important in crafting pathways, in, exposing students to what the workplace actually looks like. And, some of the best examples we've seen of some of these kind of shorter term or even longer term programs at community colleges are really the ones where the employers and the colleges are partners hand in hand and building things together and, making sure that students have the opportunity to apply it in the workplace that might be changing. They have a firsthand hand seat. And of course, employers too need to put skin in the game for this, right? If if they have so much say in the curriculum, which they're the ones with the jobs, they should be hiring too.
And supporting work-based learning experiences, right? Both in
Absolutely.
internships and client projects. We're talking to
Mhm.
Kerry McKittrick. She directs the project on workforce at Harvard. Kerry, as we start to wrap up, two questions, I guess. One, what's next? What are you working on now, or what are you working up towards? And two, just as you think about your first couple of years of contribution there at the project on workforce, who are you grateful for? Are there folks that you'd like to give a shout out to that have contributed to your work and to the field?
Thank you for asking that. So many folks, the faculty leads are just tremendous. I learn so much from them every day. Joe Fuller at the business school, Rafaela Sadoun also at the business school, Peter Blair at the education school, David Deming at the Kennedy School. And I can't forget Bob Schwartz, who, I'm sure you know Bob. We've written some pieces
Bob's
together.
Been on the podcast a few times, and
I'm sure he is a wealth of knowledge, and I won't let him retire. So he's still in our orbit. So grateful for him. And then, I'd have to say the project, we're really new, actually. So we were founded during the pandemic by Rachel Lipson and the faculty. And so, she's a core driving force at the beginning. And without naming everyone on our team, I do have to call out my co-director, Natalie Gazaneo. We're a good team. We got really lucky there. But I'll just share one thing we're working on now, which I think is going to be particularly relevant to your listeners. We are the research partner for Bloomberg Philanthropies Healthcare Career and Technical Education Initiative.
yes.
So over the next few years, we are going to be looking at how these partnerships between hospitals and health and high schools are building CTE pathways to good jobs in healthcare. And so we're going to be seeing what the outcomes are for students, what the ROI is for hospitals, and what it looks like for communities. So hopefully taking kind of a rapid approach to learning that'll help us both, contribute to the cohorts, improvement over time, which is there are about 10 schools now, as well as the broader field and different sectors who want to explore these partnership type high schools. So we're excited about that and should have some things coming soon.
We really appreciate that work. In the show notes, I'm going to include a blog that we did about Uplift Education in Texas.
Oh, great.
Their terrific CEO, Yasmin Bhatia, that was the recipient of one of those Bloomberg grants and is just doing really great work on crafting health pathways in partnership with the Baylor Med Center.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear that you're involved in that. Related to that, we're excited about Bloomberg's support for some P-Tech schools, or models that combine, early college model and work-based learning. They're growing like crazy in Texas, in rural and urban settings. So a lot of exciting work going on, and we appreciate your leadership in this space. Kerry, thanks for joining us.
For having me. This has been a great conversation, and I always love learning from this podcast. And so happy to be here. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks to our producer, Mason Pasha, and the whole Getting Smart team that make this possible. Until next week, keep learning, keep leading, keep innovating in pathways. See you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Getting Smart podcast today. We want this podcast to be actionable, insightful, and a great way to learn about what's next in learning. In order to stay on the cutting edge, we need people in the field to tell us what they're hearing, what they're wanting, and what they're needing to learn more about. Got a topic or a guest in mind? Send your recommendations to me, Mason at gettingsmart.com. And if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to leave a review in Apple Podcasts or subscribe wherever you listen. Feel free to share the podcast on social media using the hashtag GSPodcasts. Thanks so much.